Right. So, you're still awake. It's late. I know it's late. And you've got that particular kind of tired where your body says stop, but your brain says no. Let's think about something instead. Let's think about something sad and grand and deeply, weirdly comforting. Let's think about a prince who ruined everything. Let's think about Arthas Menethil. And look, I know World of Warcraft lore is not what most people would call bedtime material, but honestly, it kind of is. There's something about a tragedy told at 2 in the morning that just works. It settles into you differently, slower, more gently. So get comfortable, pull the blanket up a bit. We've got a long way to go tonight, and the road ends in ice. Arthas Menethil was the Prince of Lordaeron. Capital city, old kingdom, very prestigious. His father was King Tyrannus Menethil II, a man who had ruled for decades and who had done a reasonably decent job of it, all things considered. Not perfect, no king is, but decent, stable, the kind of ruler people forget about because things are mostly fine. And Arthas grew up in that stability, in that warm and well-lit world of courtly halls and training grounds, and the quiet assumption that one day he would inherit all of it. That's important, genuinely important, because Arthas never had to fight for anything as a child. He never had to earn his place. It was simply given to him, wrapped in ceremony, handed over like a birthright, which it was. That matters. That really does matter, in a way that becomes painfully clear later. Now, Arthas was trained as a paladin. Let's talk about that for a moment, because it sets the stage for everything that comes after. In the world of Azeroth, paladins are holy warriors, knights who channel the light, which is essentially divine energy, in order to protect the innocent and smite the wicked. Very noble, very righteous. Very much the kind of thing a young prince would aspire to. And Arthas was good at it. He was talented, charismatic, brave. He trained under Uther the Lightbringer, who was essentially the most respected paladin alive, a man of genuine conviction and deep faith. Uther was old. Uther was wise. Uther had seen things that would make your spine curl. And he took Arthas under his wing, and for a while it all looked perfectly fine. A mentor and his protege, a kingdom in order, a future that seemed bright and uncomplicated. Arthas also met Jaina Proudmoore around this time. Jaina was the daughter of Admiral Proudmoore, a powerful figure from the nation of Cultiras. She was brilliant, genuinely brilliant, a prodigy of the arcane, a student of magic at the highest level, and one of the sharpest minds of her generation. She had this way of looking at the world like it was a puzzle she could solve if she just thought hard enough. And Arthas loved that about her. They fell in love. Of course they did. They were young and attractive and destined for great things, and the world seemed to want them together. They studied at the academy in Dalaran. They spent long evenings talking about the future, about what kind of leaders they might become, about how they might make the world better. It was sweet, it was real, and it mattered, quietly, because Jaina would be the one watching Arthas slip away from her, degree by agonizing degree, and she would carry the weight of that loss for years, genuinely years. She would become one of the most powerful mages in the world, and she would still, sometimes, late at night, think about the boy who used to make her laugh. That's the thing about love. It doesn't care about power or politics or world-ending threats. It just sits there, in the back of your mind, being sad, but we're getting ahead of ourselves. We need to talk about the plague. The plague of undeath crept into Lordaeron the way most catastrophes do. Slowly, then all at once. It began in the outlying villages, in the grain supplies, in the quiet places where nobody important was paying attention. People ate the infected grain, people got sick, people died, and then people came back. That's the terrible part. That's the part that turns a plague into something worse than a plague. The dead rose, they stood up from their beds and their burial plots, and they walked and they hungered, and they attacked the living with a mindless, relentless need. Undeath, not death, undeath, a state of being that is neither alive nor gone, trapped in flesh that should have been still, animated by dark magic that had no mercy in it, and it spread, quietly, relentlessly. Village by village, town by town, the kingdom of Lordaeron began to rot from the edges inward. Arthas was sent to investigate. Of course he was. He was a paladin, he was a prince, and this was his people. He rode out with the confidence of a young man who believed the light would guide him, who believed that righteous fury was enough to fix things. And at first, it seemed like it might be. He fought the undead, he defended the living, he did what paladins do. But the plague kept spreading, and behind the plague, behind the mindless undead, there were figures pulling the strings. The Scourge, a vast, coordinated army of the dead, led by someone, with intelligence and purpose. Specifically, there was a dreadlord named Mal'Ganis, a demon from the Burning Legion, ancient and cruel, who had been tasked with overseeing the spread of the plague as part of a larger, much darker plan. The Burning Legion, if you're not familiar, was essentially an army of demons that had been trying to destroy all life in the universe for thousands of years. So this wasn't just a local problem. This was cosmic, and the plague was just the opening move. Arthas didn't know any of that, of course. He just knew that people were dying and someone had to stop it. And he became obsessed with finding the source, fixated. Mal'Ganis was the architect. Mal'Ganis was the enemy. Mal'Ganis was the one who had to be stopped, and Arthas was going to stop him, no matter what it cost. You can hear it in the way he talks during those early missions. The urgency, the intensity, the slight edge of desperation. He's not thinking strategically anymore. He's reacting. He's chasing. And chasing is what gets people into trouble every single time. Now, here's where it gets really heavy. Here's where the story takes its first true turn into darkness, and I want you to hear this slowly, because it matters. Stratholme was one of the largest cities in Lordaeron, a grand place full of people, full of life, and the grain had already arrived. The plague was already in the city. The people hadn't started turning yet, but they would. Soon, hours maybe. The infected grain had been distributed and eaten, and there was no way to know exactly who had consumed it and who hadn't. The whole city was compromised, and Arthas looked at that city, at all those people, and he made a decision that would define him forever. He ordered a purge, the Culling of Stratholme. He said, "We go in, we kill everyone, every man, woman and child, before they turn into undead, before Mal'Ganis can use them, before the plague spreads further. We kill them now, while they're still human, to save everyone else." That's a horrifying choice, genuinely horrifying. And the game, the story, doesn't shy away from that horror. Uther refused. He said, "I can't watch you do this." Jaina refused. She was appalled. She looked at Arthas and didn't recognize him. And Arthas said, "Fine, I'll do it myself." And he did. He went through Stratholme street by street, house by house, and he killed the citizens of his own kingdom. Not because he hated them, not because he was evil, not yet, but because he believed with absolute conviction that it was the only way. That is the tragedy of Arthas Menethil. He wasn't wrong exactly. The people of Stratholme were going to die one way or another, but the way he chose, the coldness of it, the certainty, the willingness to sacrifice the present to protect the future, it broke something inside him, quietly, permanently, and he didn't even notice. Mal'Ganis was there too, in Stratholme, harvesting the souls, feeding on the chaos. And when the culling was done, when the streets were silent and the dead were truly dead, Arthas looked at Mal'Ganis and said, "I'm coming for you. I'm going to follow you to the ends of the earth." And Mal'Ganis laughed in the way that demons laugh, and slipped away to the frozen continent of Northrend. So Arthas followed. He took his men, his ships, his righteous fury, and he sailed north. To the coldest place, on Azeroth, to a land of ice and snow and ancient sleeping evil. And this is where the story turns from tragedy into something almost mythic. Because Northrend broke Arthas. Not quickly, slowly, the kind of slow that makes you wince, because you can see it happening and you can't stop it. The cold, the isolation, the constant fighting against the undead. It wore him down. His men suffered, their morale collapsed. Some of them began to wonder if they were fighting for anything at all, or just dying in the snow because their prince couldn't admit he'd been wrong. His supplies dwindled, frostbite crept in, and then, when it seemed like things couldn't get worse, he received orders from Lordaeron to come home. The expedition was being recalled. His father had ordered it. His father, the king, who probably thought he was saving his son's life. And Arthas burned his own ships. He hired mercenaries to do it, then blamed the mercenaries and had his men kill them, because by that point, betrayal was just another tool in the box. And suddenly there was no way home, no retreat, no option but to push forward and find Mal'Ganis or die trying. That was deliberate. That was calculated. Arthas chose to strand himself and his entire army in a frozen wasteland because he could not bear the thought of giving up. Because the man who had purged Stratholme had lost the ability to accept that some battles are not worth winning. He had to finish it. He had to. And the howling dark of Northrend whispered back, "We know." Deep in the glaciers of Northrend, there was a rune blade, a weapon of immense and terrible power. Frostmourne. It was embedded in ice, guarded by ancient magic, and it called to Arthas the way forbidden things always call to desperate people. Quietly, insistently, with the promise that all your problems will melt away if you just reach out and take hold. Muradin Bronzebeard was there, a dwarf, a warrior, a friend. He was the one who had told Arthas about Frostmourne, and when they found it, when they stood before the pedestal of ice and read the inscription on the blade, Muradin went pale. The inscription said, "Whomsoever takes up this blade shall wield power eternal. Just as the blade rends flesh, so must power scar the spirit." Muradin said no. He said, "This is cursed. We should leave. Don't touch it." Arthas didn't listen. He took Frostmourne from the ice, and when the ice shattered, because it did shatter, violently, sending shards in every direction, one of those shards struck Muradin in the chest. He fell. He lay in the snow, barely breathing, and Arthas looked at his friend and said, "Nothing." He said nothing. He picked up the blade and walked away. Muradin was left for dead. That matters, quietly. It matters because Muradin was the last person trying to talk sense into Arthas, and when he fell, there was no one left, no one at all. Now Muradin didn't actually die. He survived, as dwarves tend to do, though with no memory of what had happened. But Arthas didn't know that. Arthas assumed his friend was dead and kept walking. That tells you something about where his mind was at that point. Not callous exactly, but absent, hollowed out, like the man inside the armour had already started to leave, and what was left was just the drive, the need, the hunger for victory at any cost. With Frostmourne in hand, Arthas found Mal'Ganis, and he killed him, easily. The rune blade was devastating, a weapon that drank the souls of those it struck, and Mal'Ganis, ancient, powerful, arrogant, was no match for it. But as the Dreadlord died, a voice spoke through Frostmourne, the voice of the Lich King, an entity of immense frozen power, imprisoned on the frozen throne at the heart of Northrend. And it said, "You are mine now. You have been mine since you first picked up this blade." And Arthas felt the last of his resistance crumble. Not with a bang, not with a scream, just quietly, just a slow, sad exhale of everything he had once been. He went home. Arthas returned to Lordaeron, and the people cheered. They lined the streets, and they cheered for their prince, their hero, their paladin, who had sailed to Northrend and defeated the enemy. And Arthas walked through those streets, in his armour, with Frostmourne at his side, and he smiled. And the smile was wrong. Just slightly wrong. The kind of wrong that you notice if you're paying attention. But most people weren't paying attention, because why would they? Their prince had come home. Everything was going to be fine. It was not fine. Arthas walked into the throne room of Lordaeron, where his father was waiting. King Tyrrhenus, old, tired, relieved, proud. He said, "Welcome home, son." And Arthas knelt before his father, and for a moment, just a moment, there was something human left in him, something that hesitated, and then it was gone. Arthas stood, drew Frostmourne, and killed his father, right there, in the throne room, on the steps of the throne, the king who had ruled for decades, the father who had loved his son, dead, by his own child's hand, and the crown of Lordaeron rolled down the steps and came to rest in a pool of blood. And Arthas picked it up. He didn't put it on, he just held it. And then he walked away, leaving the kingdom he had inherited in ruins. Because he had not come back to rule, he had come back to destroy. That matters. That really, genuinely matters. Because everything that happens afterward flows from this moment. The death of King Tyrrhenus, the fall of Lordaeron, the destruction of Quel'Thalas, and the near extinction of the High Elves. The raising of the necropolis, and the spread of the scourge across the eastern kingdoms. Arthas, now a Death Knight, a servant of the Lich King, did terrible things in the years that followed. Things that would take another hour to describe. But the point, the quiet, sad point, is that a boy who wanted to save his kingdom ended up destroying it. Not because he was born evil, but because he chose again and again to prioritize victory over mercy, control over faith, certainty over doubt. And each choice made the next one easier. That's how it works. That's how people fall. Not all at once, one step at a time, into the dark until the dark is all they know. Now, the Lich King. Let's talk about what that actually is, because the mythology here is genuinely rich and worth sitting with. The Lich King was not always a single entity. It was created when the orc warlock Ner'zhul, whose spirit had been captured and tortured by the demon lord Kil'jaeden, was encased in a block of ice and dropped onto the frozen throne at the summit of Icecrown, the darkest place in Northrend. Ner'zhul's consciousness became the first Lich King, a being of immense psychic power who could command the undead, spread plague and bend the will of the living. But the Lich King needed a physical champion, a vessel, and that vessel was Arthas. When Arthas took Frostmourne, his soul was bound to the blade, and the blade was bound to the Lich King, and slowly, over time, Arthas and Ner'zhul began to merge. Their identities blurred, their wills intertwined, and when Arthas finally ascended the frozen throne, when he climbed the spire of ice at the heart of Icecrown and placed the helm of domination upon his own head, the merger was complete. Arthas became the Lich King, not a servant anymore, the master, the one mind in control of the largest army of the dead the world had ever seen, and the frozen throne, that block of ice, that prison, became a seat of power instead. There's something deeply ironic about that, quietly, profoundly ironic. The prison became a palace, the chains became a crown, and the man who had once been a prince of the living became the king of the dead. Arthas sat upon the frozen throne for years, brooding, planning, waiting. The scourge grew. The world watched. And nothing happened, not yet, because the Lich King was patient, genuinely patient. He had all the time in the world, and all the dead in it too. And then the Lich King woke up. Not literally woke up, he'd been conscious the whole time, but something changed. He became active, aggressive. He sent the scourge south, into the lands of the living, in a way he hadn't before. There were outbreaks in major cities. Necropolises floated over capital cities, like dark moons, raining down undead. People panicked, people died, people came back, and the world responded, both the Alliance and the Horde, who had spent most of their history at each other's throats, realized that this was bigger than politics. This was survival. This was the beginning of what the people of Azeroth called the Wrath of the Lich King, a full-scale war against the Scourge, fought on the frozen shores of Northrend, where heroes from both factions sailed to confront the greatest threat they had ever faced. And it was massive. Thousands of soldiers, adventurers, mages, priests, warriors, all marching north into the cold, all fighting their way through the Plague Lands and the tundra and the storm peaks, all pushing toward the same destination, Icecrown Citadel, the fortress of the Lich King, the seat of his power, the last place any of them wanted to be. There were battles along the way, terrible battles. The heroes fought through Asjol-Nerub, the ancient Nerubian kingdom beneath the ice, where spider-like creatures had lived for millennia and were now twisted into servants of the Scourge. They fought through Ulduar, the prison of an old god named Yogg-Saron, whose whispers drove people mad and whose tendrils reached deep into the foundations of Northrend. They fought through the Argent Tournament, where Tyrion Fordring gathered champions and tested them, trying to find the strongest warriors for the final assault. And all the while, the Lich King watched. He watched from his throne, and he smiled, and he waited. Because every hero who came to Northrend was walking exactly where he wanted them to go. Icecrown Citadel was a monument to dread. It rose from the glaciers of Northrend like a black spike driven into the world, surrounded by fields of the dead, guarded by armies of undead that stretched to the horizon. Inside, the Lich King waited. He had planned for this. He had wanted this. He had allowed the heroes of Azeroth to come to him, to fight through his fortress, to defeat his lieutenants and his minions, because he needed them. He needed their strength. He needed their souls, because the Lich King's plan was not just to defeat the heroes, it was to raise them, to kill the greatest warriors Azeroth had ever produced, and then bring them back as his own champions, creating an unstoppable force that would sweep across the entire world. That's the thing about the Lich King. He was not mindless. He was not a simple villain. He was intelligent, strategic, cold in every sense of the word, and the heroes who walked into Icecrown Citadel did so knowing, on some level, that they were walking into a trap, but they went anyway, because that's what heroes do. That's what they've always done. They walk into the dark because someone has to, and there's no one else. At the heart of Icecrown Citadel, at the top of the frozen throne, the Lich King waited. And when the heroes finally reached him, battered, exhausted, many of their friends already dead, the battle began. It was brutal. The Lich King was powerful, beyond anything they had faced before, wielding Frostmourne with a speed and precision that made the greatest warriors look like children. He killed them. He actually killed them. All of them. Every hero who stood against him fell, their souls ripped from their bodies and drawn into Frostmourne. And the Lich King stood over their bodies and said, "I will remake this world in the image of the Scourge." And for a moment, it was over. The heroes were dead. The Lich King had won. The world was finished. But then something happened. Something quiet. Something that had been set in motion years before, in the most unlikely of places. Tyrion Fordring. Tyrion was a paladin. An old paladin, by this point. He had been exiled years earlier for showing mercy to an orc of all things, for believing that honour mattered more than politics and being punished for it. Which is a deeply ironic thing to happen to a paladin, if you think about it. The whole point of being a paladin is that you're supposed to do the right thing, and when Tyrion did the right thing, they stripped him of his rank and sent him away. He had lived in isolation, in a small house in the Plague Lands, watching the world go to pieces from a distance. But he had never stopped believing in the light, genuinely, quietly. He had never stopped believing that justice was possible, even when every piece of evidence suggested otherwise. And when the war against the Lich King began, Tyrion answered the call. He gathered the Argent Crusade, a coalition of the faithful, and he marched to Icecrown, not because he thought he could win, but because it was right. Because sometimes doing the right thing means walking into a place where you will almost certainly die, and doing it anyway, with your head up and your sword drawn. And at the top of Icecrown Citadel, when the Lich King had killed all the heroes and was gloating, Tyrion Fordring broke free from the block of ice he had been trapped in, and he raised his weapon, the Ashbringer, a blade of pure light, and he shattered Frostmourne. He shattered it, the rune blade that had consumed thousands of souls, the weapon that had been the instrument of Arthas's fall, the blade that had killed King Tyrannus and Muradin and so many, many others. It broke. And when it broke, all the souls inside it, all the souls the Lich King had consumed, were released. They surged out like a tide, and they surrounded the Lich King, and they held him. And the heroes who had been killed moments before, they came back. The souls that Frostmourne had stolen returned to their bodies, and they stood up and they fought. The Lich King fell. Arthas, the man inside the armor, the boy who had once been a prince, looked up from the ground and said something that will stay with me for a long time. He said, "I see only darkness before me." And then he died. And the helm of domination, the crown of the Lich King, clattered to the ground. And the question became, what now? Because the scourge didn't stop. The undead were still out there, millions of them, and without a Lich King to control them, they would have rampaged across the world mindlessly, causing destruction on a scale that would have made the original plague look like a sneeze. Someone had to put the helm on. Someone had to sit on the frozen throne and hold the scourge in check. Someone had to sacrifice themselves, their identity, their life, their future, and become the jailer. Bolvar Fordragon stepped forward. Bolvar was a noble man, a paladin in his own right, who had served as regent of Stormwind during a time of crisis, who had been captured and tortured by the Lich King's forces and had survived, though the fire that burned inside him, literally dragon fire, which had left him permanently scarred and immune to the cold, had changed him. He was not the same man he had been. His skin was golden and cracked like cooling lava. His eyes glowed with an inner heat. He looked like something between a man and a monument, but his conviction was intact, quietly, genuinely intact. He looked at the helm of domination, and he said, "I will bear this burden. I will be the jailer of the damned." And he placed the helm upon his head, and Bolvar Fordragon became the new Lich King. Not out of ambition, not out of hunger for power, but out of duty, out of sacrifice, out of the kind of love for the world that is almost impossible to articulate at 2 a.m, but that you can feel in your chest if you let yourself. He sat upon the frozen throne, encased in ice, alone, and he held the scourge in check for years, alone, in the cold, and nobody talked about him, nobody celebrated him. He was just there, quietly, doing the thing that needed to be done because someone had to do it. And that is the story of Arthas Menethil. That is the story of the Lich King. A boy who wanted to save his kingdom. A prince who became a Death Knight who became a king who fell. And another man, quietly, genuinely, who sat down in the cold and said, "I'll take it from here." It's a sad story. It's genuinely sad. But there's something in it that I find comforting. And I hope you do too, even if you're half asleep by now. Because the world of Azeroth went on. The people of Lordaeron grieved, and then they rebuilt, and then they grieved again. Because that's what people do. They endure. They carry the weight of impossible losses, and they keep going. And the heroes who fought the Lich King went home eventually. And they told their stories. And their children told those stories. And the story of Arthas became what all great tragedies become. A warning and a memory, and a way of understanding how even the brightest light can be swallowed by the dark. That matters. It matters because stories like this are how we make sense of the things that scare us. They're how we sit with the idea that good people can do terrible things, and that love and duty and sacrifice don't always lead to happy endings, and that sometimes the hero is the person nobody expected. A disgraced paladin, a scarred regent, a man who simply refused to look away when the world needed someone to stand in the gap. And sometimes the villain is a boy who loved his kingdom too much. That's the part that stays with me, honestly. Not the battles or the swords or the frozen thrones. The boy, the prince, the one who wanted to do right and ended up doing the worst thing imaginable and never quite understood where it all went wrong. That's human. That's painfully, quietly human. And it's why, 2 a.m. or not, the story of Arthas Menethil feels less like fantasy and more like a mirror. So, you're still here. You've made it through the story of the Lich King. And it's late. And your eyes are probably heavy by now. And that's good. That's exactly where you should be. Let the cold of Northrend fade a little. Let the image of the frozen throne soften at the edges. You don't need to hold on to any of this. You just need to let it settle. The Lich King sits in the cold, the world turns, and you, right now, in this quiet moment, can let go. You can close your eyes. You can breathe slowly. You can trust that the story will still be there tomorrow, and the day after, and the day after that. It's not going anywhere. Arthas isn't going anywhere. He's in the ice, and the ice is still, and everything is still. So let yourself drift. Let the warmth of your bed carry you the way the sea carries a ship, slowly, gently, without effort. You don't need to fight it. You don't need to think about anything else tonight. Just the quiet, just the dark, just the soft, steady rhythm of your own breathing. Good night, friend. Sleep well. The Lich King can wait until morning.